Uh,
Well, there you go.
oh Jesus!
Well, it's your show. You're supposed to say nice things about yourself. At
Uh,
least
I never
encouraging.
knew. I'm resident of Collinwood for YouTube, joined by Dean Edwards and Lynn Edwards. How are you folks?
We're doing real well, Lynn.
Except I didn't get any sleep last night from all that storm activity, but I'm basically awake. Ask me questions.
Mm.
You got to get that caffeine in you. Let's see.
Yeah.
Well, I'm drinking some black tea, some organic black tea. But the thing is, I got all hyped up on Quentin killing Jenny. And
yes.
so I had to go through those episodes because Dean needed to find out
Oh yeah.
exactly where the Collins found out that Jenny was a gypsy.
Oh yeah. And let me give Jill. Let me give people a really important reference source. It's the best thing out there on gypsies in the Roma in the United States. A lot of history in there as well. It's a study by a lady. She's a PhD anthropologist, but she grew up. Her father had what amounted to a general store type of a market, and he was very accommodating and worked with the local Roma community when they would come in, and he worked with them on their terms.
What, maybe Jill wants to
And
get started.
and the
You
book
can
is
tell him
the
that.
book is called Familiar Strangers, and people look it up. It's really amazing, and it'll set you straight on a lot of basic protocols and procedures, the do's and don'ts, and truisms, and a truth about gypsy life in America.
Yeah, you find out real fast that there's a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of mistakes in Dark Shadows, but really,
Not really.
there really aren't.
They
There
all
really
they all
aren't.
can be explained. They all
Yeah,
can be
they can be
explained.
explained.
When you
So-
get it, when I hear, see, Dark Shadows is based upon a lot of things.
Yeah.
See, when you get into DNA and ancestry, and I'm sure you guys know this too, because unless you actually have a history book like the Collins family do, which I don't, what you're usually told about your ancestors by who? Your parents and their parents and so forth and so forth. It's passed down basically. And
Yeah.
you actually get this in Dark Shadows too, because Lewis Edmonds, who played Roger Collins, he's on top of Widow's Hill with Alexander Moltke-Isles, who plays Victoria Winters, and they're talking about the widows, and that's where you first hear mention of Jeremiah Collins, how Jeremiah chased the widows away. He told them that to take their sorrows.
Oh yeah.
Once he chose to build the house on top of the hill. And then he says, well, they never went away, because what he's implying is as soon as he told them they went away, they came back up here one night and jumped. And it's sort of like some of that's not necessarily true, because Jeremiah, you're given the pretense that Jeremiah is this big jerk, and that's not true at all. He's not. So what Roger is saying is, in a sense, is a lie. And it's not that he's lying directly. He's just lying because he's been told this, so he believes it.
And he's also telling a story about the family, and if you listen to any of us speak, do you get everything right when you say it? I don't in Deep Shadows. I make mistakes all the time and have to go back and correct it later on. So sometimes there are miscues and misstatements because it was one take, live TV essentially, and that was it. Then move on to the next thing. So Dan, the lighting guy, walked across the set. Well, there you go.
Yeah, there's things in Dark Shadows, like you'll see.
How about when Barnabas and Vicky were talking about something, and you can hear a radio with a ball game going for about 5 minutes?
Well,
did you see that one?
You'll also hear you'll hear they're in the great house, and you'll hear a fire extinguisher going. Well, the set caught fire.
That's perfect.
Oh yeah,
that's perfect.
Yeah, so stuff happens. It's normal. As a matter of fact, those kind of spoken errors, that's part of normal life, and it made the show a little bit better. So if they get some of the answers a little wrong or something, you catch it by just listening more closely over time. And if you want to know the history of the Collins family, it's embedded in the show
Yeah.
because if you ask the main question that I asked, the very first question is, how does a white immigrant English family achieve that kind of wealth and privilege, especially when the first thing they do is they move over into the middle of King William's War, right on the frontier, and right when people are being slaughtered right and left, and they survive miraculously.
And they did real well.
And they did really
they
well.
did
What does that tell you about
well.
the fortitude of Isaac Collins?
Isaac
not young.
Collins was something. I'm not saying it because I don't want to give him away.
No, that's a whole nother long subject. Yeah.
I don't want to give him away because my interpretation, my novel, the one I'm writing, has a lot to do with Isaac. There's things going on with Isaac that really place that historically. It makes a good point. And if it didn't, I wouldn't write it because I don't think it would be fair to fans. We've
dug into the history of Hampshire and Somerset and Dorset and Dorchester and all that whole area.
And I had to go back and rewrite enormous portions.
So we've learned a lot
because the history had.
Yeah, we've learned a lot about what's likely to have happened. And by the way, I said there was something that you really helped me out with because you challenged me on something when we were going through this before, and you were right. There were a lot of people that wrote Dark Shadows, but Dan Curtis's role as a producer and especially as an executive producer was to watch that storyline, to make sure all the elements were there, make sure the funding was there, make sure he had the right people on staff, that they were doing their job. A lot of things to coordinate, believe me, I know. And
yeah, I did it for a 16-minute movie that I had to do in college, and it was miserable. It was the hardest work I've ever done in my life. It's a 16-minute movie.
I was when I interviewed Will McKinley and Nancy Kersey was telling me that the writers had cast Jonathan Frid. Dan Curtis was in France at the time that happened. So, and you actually hear Jonathan Frid say that in an interview he gave. So it's
wow.
I'm like, I didn't know that myself. So now Dan Curtis himself, the thing I think Dan Curtis doesn't get enough credit for is actually coming up with the concept of Dark Shadows, where he dreamt about the girl on the train, because that went on to become Victoria Winters. It's funny because at the time
he needed a governess. It's Gothic. He was thinking Gothic. So he needed that governess character. Yeah.
Vicky was definitely needed. I don't think there could have been anything workable without it. They did drag her out a bit. I think they could have given her more of an edge. I don't think that putting her on edge as late as they did was really fair. She needed more. What I want to say is she needed more activity.
Well, she's kind of between Emma and Anna Green Gables, it's somewhere in the middle between.
But plus Alexandra got pregnant, she didn't feel good, and I mean, what are you gonna do? You're gonna go to work not feeling good every time you go to work? You don't feel well.
If you watch the Phoenix arc, Alexandra Mulkey Isles can be a bit antagonistic because there's a scene between her when she's in the drawing room, and there's the story about when they said about burned alive, that the other Laura in Phoenix was burned alive, and Alexandra repeats it in a how do I put this, in an antagonistic tone, and she's looking right at Laura when she says it, and it's on purpose because she's basically antagonizing her. It's really good. It's great acting by Alexandra, and I think that's something the show had so much of. It had great writing, and the actors and actresses, when they weren't selling with their words, they were selling with their facial features, and you see a lot of that with Burt Devlin early on too. When he steps off the train, well, even on the train, he's smiling, but when he steps off the train, when he's talking to Alexandra Mokialis, when he's talking to Victoria Winters, at first he's smiling at her until she mentions Collinwood, and then that smile goes away, and it's just like, oh shit. Here's my question to you both: when did you both first get into Dark Shadows?
Oh, I saw a couple episodes in high school. I was in speech and debate at the time. We had college level rhetoric, and I was working on political campaigns in some pretty serious ways in the 1960s. So I only saw little glimpses of it. And Lynn, what about you?
You know, that is such a long time ago. I mean, I suppose I might have been in 7th grade.
Yeah.
And my parents, TV was only allowed by them. If they didn't want you to see things, they walk into your life and flip it off.
Yeah.
And my mother and father were both very fond of doing it.
But
and
you were active. You were
my father's a colonel in the Air Force, and so he was a very youthful one.
Yeah.
It's just the way he acted. Like he'd say something like, well, it's time for me to watch my bowling. It's time for me to watch my tennis. It's time for me to watch my baseball. And he'd just walk right through the room and flick. And it didn't matter what you were watching, or if you wanted to watch anything, you didn't say that. Not to my father. No. He was an absolute. You did not disobey my father. No way. You didn't give him
decorated fighter pilot.
You did not give that man lip.
No, Korean War.
And he was the Raven he looked like. He looked a lot like Anthony Perkins, if you must know. They could have been brothers. They looked so much alike. But at that time, he was not given to allowing us any privileges. None. So if I was going to watch Dark Shadows, I might get half an hour of one episode, maybe every 2 weeks, or if at all, anything.
But you were a school photographer in middle school, and then in high school you were on the swim team, so you were pretty busy.
So I was extremely busy. I really didn't get to see Dark Shadows till about 2015. I really got to see.
We watched some of it in the 90s. You don't remember it, but we did watch some of it in the 90s. But the way
just
enough to get us interested.
The public stations didn't serve it to us in a way that was kind of cognizant for a fan.
Not like Hulu or subscribing to the Dan Curtis estate.
You can look at stuff now. You can go through 20, 30 episodes at a time if you want to, and you can stop, and they'll take care of you. They'll keep your space like Tubi will. They'll boot up where you were. They'll say, oh, do you want to watch this? And they'll include, they have this little pull down window that you can go through the various seasons, and you can go through that if you want. There was no such thing there just was no such
thing. So we do both. We support the estate and we and their work. And we also watch it on Tubi.
Oh yeah, I missed the fan stuff with the actors and all that stuff, but what I get out of this is much more creative. I get a lot of creative flow out of what I see and what I can put together. So that for me, that's writing heaven for me.
Yeah, I'm also a trained herald from the Society for Creative Anachronism. I was a full pursuivant. I had an account.
What's a pursuivant?
That is somebody who's registered as a practicing herald, as a mid-level herald. It's an official position. And I also am a trained bard through the Order of Bards, Obates, and Druids. So I've got, when it comes to looking at genealogy and storytelling and organizing ritual and the whole medieval kind of and Renaissance approach.
Oh yeah, and he gets after me, Jewel. Oh, this man gets after me like, he's within a few days exact birthday of Michael Keaton, and he's also in the same year as our dear Luke Skywalker. What's his name? Come on, Luke Skywalker.
I'm forgetting his name.
Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill, yeah.
He's right there within a month of Mark Hamill as well. Exactly,
Okay.
exact birthdays. I mean, these people are talents. They're talented. And Dean is if Dean could see, he would be doing stuff you wouldn't.
Oh yeah,
even
heads
believe.
up. I'm a blind
He's blind writer,
writer
journalist.
and journalist and editor and host of various shows.
We say eyesight impaired. It's just
Yeah, nothing wrong with my vision, but I'm definitely blind.
Eyesight
Mostly.
Who's you guys' favorite Dark Shadows character?
Jeez.
That's an interesting question because it changes all the time. I'd have to break that into the unknown, the ones that are listed and the ones that actually get some screen time. The one that's not listed, that's listed but never really explored, and you have to dig into a lot of the history and stuff, would definitely be Annabella Collins.
Yeah, but she's not even in the series.
She's mentioned in the series, and she's only the one that got the Collins family fortune going.
Oh, David did mention her.
But so she's mentioned, but
yes,
that's about it.
Did.
You never really find out about it.
He did say something about her.
But she was the one who took over. Her son was underage, and she kept everything going, just in time for another war.
Yeah, you have to do the two-step with David Collins. He for quite a while he was my favorite actor in the series. I mean, Jonathan Frid obviously is very awesome, and so is Alexandra Mulcahy, and all of these the seasoned acting of Louis Edmonds and Joan Bennett, but hands down for extraordinary creativity and acting would be David Hennessy, because David Hennessy was remarkable.
Oh yeah,
he really wasn't given the recognition I think that he should have had. He was able to go through all these different kinds of changes. I mean, multitudes of them. I've never seen anything like this kid. Of course, Yang Fire Monkeys can do stuff like this. They can do stuff that I wouldn't even imagine doing.
My favorite historical character is going to be Captain Quentin Collins from the 1840s and afterwards. They only little hints on the afterwards.
Oh, just to give you a heads up, when I say Yang Fire Monkey, David Hennessy was born into Yang Fire Monkey, which is the genius of the 12 lunar houses of the Chinese zodiac. Monkeys are the geniuses. They perform things that you and I can't even imagine, and they extrovert it. In other words, they can give it to you. They can not only can they do it, they can give what they do to you and make you feel like you're a part of what they do, which is very hard to do. That's why I said David Hennessy as all the different, permutations of young Collins boys that David Hennessy did was remarkable. How he did it, who knows? But he's right up there with Jonathan Frid. Jonathan too is one of my favorite, but so is David Hennessy. The two of them are kind of right there even. In and Out, I like Quentin Collins, or the different permutations of Captain Quentin Collins, Parallel Time Quentin Collins. They didn't really give him enough edge, I felt, in Parallel Time. If they'd given him a little bit of edge sooner, I would have gone back and rewrote him. But the rewriting of him is because he has to figure in David Collins' future in my novel. So he has to go along with the whole family now. Before he kind of was separate, he had his little life thing started, and I had him in the novel that way. But no, he's going to go right along with the family. He's going to go right into the future.
Not only that, but he's the Collins who's the most expert at reinventing himself, because he can't just be a forever guy that's always around and never ages. So
David Selby was able to do it magnificently. He's another one. Snake people. He was born in the year of the snake, and snake people are magically endowed. All of the different snake people are. let's see, the guy that played Chekhov in the new Star Trek movie, he was a snake. Anton, who was crushed by a car, unfortunately, and died. He was a snake boy. He was very talented. David Selby's remarkable. I'm glad he stayed alive, because snake people have a tendency to get in accidents that cause them to die, unfortunately. And I know, because Dean and I were very privileged and very lucky to have been able to know Dean's best friend, who lived in Hercules, which is in California. And he was a remarkable human being. And he was one of the most wonderful people I have ever met. And Dean had him in college, and he was a snake. And him and his son were murdered in a robbery. So it broke our hearts. But these people are very talented. David Selby, major talent.
Well, I got to give a shout out to Jonathan Frid. Overall, he edges out Elizabeth. The Barnabas Collins edges out cousin Elizabeth. But Joan Bennett's portrayal definitely makes her an amazing character. She was definitely the queen of the set, and they all had the same comment on that. But what Jonathan did for the series, what he did for to reimagine the concept of a vampire, just amazing. That goes to his acting, the directors, their interplay. I think Jonathan provided us with a Barnabas Collins that is for the ages.
I think the one thing Joan Bennett doesn't get enough credit for is everyone points out, well, Dark Shadows revitalized her career. Yeah, it did, but she also brought credibility to it in every way, because here's this actress who started in the 30s and 40s and was acting in these gangster movies and in movies like Little Women, and by the time Dark Shadows come around, she's still making movies, but not as much. And lo and behold, here comes Dark Shadows, and she takes the role, and she gives this big credibility to this. At the time, this gothic soap opera, and she was wonderful in that. And
if you look at her bio, what isn't officially there, but her daughter has done a great. What was that podcast series called? About
Joan Bennett,
her boyfriend when she was married and having an affair. Her boyfriend, her husband shot her boyfriend right down where you don't want to get shot, and it was in the car, and she had experience in trauma that she took into the Dark Shadows.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of her in Elizabeth. It's very interesting.
Yeah, she was able to project it, She could project.
How David Selby's Quentin's ghost, when we meet Quentin's ghost and then we meet the person, it's like it's two very different people.
Oh yeah, he's an actor. Yeah.
Well, Quentin's ghost, of all ghosts that I've seen, and he scared me horribly. Yeah. I had problems sleeping after watching the ghost episodes with Quentin, and I'm going to be 60 something this year. And I'll tell you what, my mind was just reeling. I couldn't believe it. I was just terrified of him. I was like, oh my God, what would I have done if I was Barnabas? I would have run away. See, now Barnabas was taking it on. He was taking on responsibility and saying, well, I've got to do something. And I'm the one that has to, because, I'm stuck with this. I got to do this. Yeah. I mean, if he hadn't, who was going to do it?
Yeah, he gets put in charge of the household too. And it's like when Roger comes back, he's yelling at him because the kids are possessed.
It's not like Roger didn't care. He didn't pay attention to that. That wasn't in his mindset. And he kept shoving that onto everyone else. The fact that he didn't want to keep that mindset. Now he'd step in and out of that mindset about the ghosts if it made him happy. Okay. And it made his world more peppy
And proper.
and proper and fun. Okay. That's great. I mean, you see an evidence of that when they had the seance um, in the first couple hundred episodes of Dark Shadows, when Barnabas had him over and they had the seance, and Roger's like, oh, let's have a seance. You know, this is a costume party. Let's have some fun. You know, Barnabas didn't want to do that. You know, he did not want to do that. And here's Louis Edmonds, you know, as Roger's going, hey, this will be fun. Let's pull the table over. Let's all hold hands. Let's get a ghost going here, you know. Come on, you know.
There are moments where Lewis Edmonds as Roger is a father in a lot of ways. During the Phoenix arc, when they're talking about the boy, when he reads the article about the boy being burned alive and how the boy's name was David, and he comes to the realization of, oh my God.
Yeah.
Lewis Edmonds does a really good job of honing that. And there's that moment.
In all of his roles, he does an amazing job.
Yeah, and there's that moment during the Quentin Collins arc when he realizes his son is possessed. And there's that moment of, oh my God, it's real. It's really terrifying how, for the most part, that's sort of where, because Roger and David Hennessy, not David Hennessy, David Collins' relationship was always constantly changing during the show. Prior to the Phoenix arc, you had David Collins trying to kill his dad and by removing the bleeder valve. Then later on, you have, after the Phoenix arc, it changes a little bit, but it doesn't change enough.
But in fairness, Roger Collins in the Dark Shadows Bible, the story Bible for the series, the original, he was the bad guy. He wasn't going to survive the first season. He was going to die. He was the evil guy. He was the villain of the series. And there was this redemption of Roger Collins that began to happen as they started writing out the series, and they changed his character. He got redeemed and became somebody you really wanted to get better. And all through the series, he messes up, but there's this slow arc of redemption, and he's an interesting character when viewed that way. And when you look at the Bible, for the original story Bible, he's a very darker, very different character.
Well, there's the original story Bible, I'm sure, is interesting. I think there's moments where Roger is dark, but Roger's humorous at being dark. That's the thing. Like when he's pounding on Sam Evans, or open the door, you drunken bum. It's like, it's funny. And then there's, like I said, during the Quentin Collins arc, when he realizes his son's possessed, it's very heartbreaking to him to realize there's nothing, he's powerless to do anything about it, and there's nothing he can really do. And it's really, I mean, Lewis Edmonds, it's criminally underrated actor. But what did you guys think of Angelique?
Fascinating character. She's been really challenging. There's so many things about that character. Her ability to move through time. Her ability. She also had to learn her skills and hone them. And she became a remarkable, very powerful character. And it's caused us to take a good, serious look. If you look at my Goodreads page, it's under my full name, Michael Dean Edwards. I've got a Deep Shadows Essentials shelf. It's named after the Twitter space that Lynn and I do every Tuesday, and it's on my Goodreads page. I've got a bookshelf with over 500 references in there that cover everything from the Elizabethan period up into the middle of this century. So there's an entire range of things to look for parallel worlds, for fiction writing, for script writing, for historical accounts, anything that could apply to the development of that kind of cast of characters.
So I think Louis probably had a family member that he remembered,
Mm-hmm.
who he knew very intimately, maybe when he was growing up or maybe when he was in school, he knew this person or a couple of guys in his family tree, and he remembered them very, very strongly. And so he took some of what he remembered and just moved it right into Roger, because people down south, oh, they're tough nuts to crack. They have specific ways of doing everything, and that's how they want it done. And if you don't do it that way, they don't let you go to the left or to the right. They just want you to go straight ahead. And it's real interesting how some of my family members came back from the east, from Virginia, and married into the Fitzgerald family, which were Irish in California.
Most of your family is from North Carolina, though.
And well, they went from the Pearsons went into Virginia.
Well, the Coxes were in Virginia.
Yeah, the Coxes and the Knights.
Yeah,
spelled with a
K. The Pearsons
K.
were in Orange County.
The Knights.
North
the
Carolina.
Knights kind of spread out into the mercantile businesses, and they. My grandpa Knight married Grandma Clara Day, and Clara Day was turned to Knight. So they used to tease her all the time, but she was a mega brain, and they used her as the first tax collector of Bakersfield County,
Kern
County in California, because Kern County was just a big open space, and everybody rode their buggies up to the house and paid their taxes. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking, 5'4" tall, a little Irish woman with real curly red hair and real, she had a very straightforward, no nonsense approach to everything she did. Grandpa Knight made up his own words. So you'd get all kinds of stuff from him that just, he'd make stuff up. He'd make up his own sentences and word structures and all kinds of stuff. And he'd tease everybody that came over. The way Clara had told my grandma Alta was that he teased people endlessly, is the way she put it. So they made him the first gardener of Bakersfield County. And they gave him that position, and he gardened in the city and all around there for about 35 years and took care of their gardens and did all this other stuff. And they had land clear up to the mountains and all this other stuff. But that's neither here nor there. What is interesting is that they had a straightforward way of doing it, not to the left, not to the right. Only Grandpa Knight, who came, seemingly out of nowhere, he was this big, tall, happy-go-lucky guy that looked like that guy who was in The Wizard of Oz. He looked like the guy.
He came from Michigan, because we saw a driver's license.
What's his name? Who's the guy that played the wizard in The Wizard of Oz?
Oh, I forget.
Well, I can't remember his name. I know.
Yeah. My Grandpa Knight looked just like that guy, and he sounded like him. He looked like him. He even moved like that guy. And I thought, they had this way about them that even if you were that kind of person, straightforward, not to the left, not to the right, they'd get you to laugh.
You're a serious Dark Shadows fan when you only meet your great grandfather after he dies. Yeah. That's in the case of Lynn.
Yeah, I played with him when he was dead, and Alta had to straighten me out. My father's mother had to straighten me out, because I said, well, I can't find Grandpa. I can't find him anymore. He's been coming over all the time, and now I can't find him. And where is he, Grandma? Where is he? And finally, she just said, honey, he's been dead for...
That was her father.
Yeah, that was her father. He's been dead for 5 years. She straightened me out. But he was really there to me, just like Sarah. And I didn't know the difference. So, it took a family member to straighten me out and get me, going in the right direction. Or I guess what they thought.
What did you both think of Count Andreas Patofi?
Patofi. Patofi, I looked it up. It's a Hungarian name. So that explains some things about him. He's a really fascinating character, and the thing that's really interesting is in the 1890s episode, we know he had been back in the back in England, in Hampshire, and he at that point was 300 years old, which it suggests that some of these supervillains that have those extra normal abilities, those paranormal abilities, they've probably been sticking around for a long time, and we've got another one that fits into that also. So those two characters are fascinating. But Count Patafi, he's a really great, arrogant, corrupting character, and he's a classic villain. And what they did with him in the story, I think, was brilliant. His arrogance ended up being his downfall, as it is with most villains.
I think he was, honestly, I think he's a character who was born with his powers. I mean, even after he loses the hand from the gypsies, he still has some power, but the hand has its own power. What the writers, I think, really did, now, not the powers, mind you, but what they really do with Patofi is they make him this Ben Gibbons character at first, meaning he's a character of disguise. I somewhat think they're paying homage to a character who was a lot older than Patofi, a very older character from the pulps called the Shadow, because the Shadow was a master of disguise. And the Shadow had agents. Well, if you look at Patofi, he has Charles Delaware Tate, he has Aristide, he has his own agents, if you will, his own henchmen who gather information for him and do things for him. That's what the Shadow had too. So I do think there's a bit, they're taking a bit from the pulps, which is nice, in my opinion, which is nice. And to give a character, to make your own character sort of from scratch and give him these immense powers is something else. It was really amazing to see that type of character, because when we saw Angelique, I mean, we're seeing this woman who, was a witch, and she was in love with Barnabas. She knew him for a long time. They met in Martinique and hit it off. And she was always in love with him. And then you're thinking, well, how many characters are we going to meet? And then we meet the devil, and then we meet Patofi.
Yep, the devil.
Yeah, we meet Patofi. Yeah, what did you think about that? We got to briefly go into hell for Dark Shadows and see Satan himself, if you will.
That was racy for that period, bringing. I mean, they took an awful chance. They could have been canceled for doing this.
There was there was a disturbance in a town in the late '60s when somebody put up a fake notice that there was going to be a Satanist meeting, and people were ready to riot.
Yeah.
In the late '60s.
They could have. He took it. I think he did. I think Dan did the right thing. He did it to have a juxtaposition. It was only fair. I mean, you had to figure out that there was some kind of plot. So the only way to figure it out was to bring in the devil or Satan and have him dressed up, whatever personification he wanted to have. And he wasn't too bad. He could, if he was too vicious, that wouldn't have worked. They would have been canceled. If he'd been too wishy-washy, they would have been laughing at him saying, oh, this isn't worth watching. So he kind of went in the center of it and put Laura Parker in a position to react enough to make sure that we understood that this is the devil and he's not messing around. He's just got this plan that he wants done. Okay, he's got more than one, obviously, but this is a plan he wants done, and he wants you to tell him he doesn't want to have to spend any of his time trying to figure out what you're supposed to tell him, which is true, because demonics would act that way. They
Well,
would do that.
he's like the studio owner.
Yeah.
He's the, you know.
He's the head of the studio.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, don't you tell me.
You want me to come
All right.
down there and direct the play? I'm busy.
Yeah.
You direct it.
I'm busy. Yeah, I got all these bikini girls out here, and I got all this stuff going on here. You know, I've got 500 actresses I have to,
You got to tell people coffee
talk
breaks over,
to.
time to stand on your head.
You know, well, the devil or Satan is much worse. He may have 1 million actresses he's got to go through a day, or he may have millions of people he's got to go through today to make sure that they all fit in positions in hell. You know, like
hopefully, according to him.
Well, in Netflix, they brought that out in the Sandman, in this Sandman series. They brought out what was kind of a fight between Satan Morningstar, which was a female personification of the devil, and the Sandman, who's supposed to be an eternal because he just gives everybody their dreams. So I think that portrayal of hell in there was pretty good. It is scary as hell, but it is pretty good because, you know, Neil Gaiman knows how to write scary crap, and he can really throw it in there. I wish if I had even one little gold nugget of his talent in my brain, I could make these Dark Shadows novels that I'm planning a riot, because Gaiman is really superb. I don't know if you got a chance to watch.
We got to get through this bottleneck right now, them kind of locking down on everything.
Yeah, Dark Shadows. I think maybe the Curtis estate might be locking down on new projects for Dark Shadows, but I haven't heard anything. I don't know anything.
Well, they're still currently shopping the new series around.
Yeah. They had somebody, they didn't like the delays, and so they said, well, we're not meeting your deadlines. We got to move this forward. So they're still looking. In the meantime, they want to transition and reinvent the series. And once they do that, it's Dark Shadows. So parallel worlds, you know, it could be a whole, it's still Dark Shadows, because that's one of the strengths of having parallel worlds, is you get to reimagine the entire series. And then once they do that, we'll see what they do with allowing people to still write from some of the original story arc, because I've done so much research on it, on the science side, on the history side, on the social side, that I can explain all kinds of different things in the series. We couldn't fit it into one of your shows, but writing
a future Angelique is tough.
Then you get to research witches, actual historical witchcraft trials, and all of that. And what was that?
The reason writing future Angelique is so difficult is because technology and science is involved. And the reason it is involved is because we have to move Dark Shadows, or I have to move Dark Shadows into the 2000s and into the 2060s, and then from the 2060s into another possible 100 years beyond that. And the reason for that is that Collins have a certain bent according to Phoenix energies from the Lauras, all the different Lauras. They have certain situations they have to go through because of what's called the perversions, which is vampirism and the werewolf. Those are perversions. I'm not going to tell you what they are or why they exist. The devil just used that as an excuse to make people do things that he plotted or she plotted that didn't have anything to do with what physically and technologically and in science those bodies and those curses really were and where they really began.
And we got to do a lot of listening to other writers about werewolves and vampires and all these other different kinds of creatures. We got to research a lot of Egyptian stuff, and it's been a great opening. Right now we're looking at China, because China is always in the background with the Dark Shadows series.
Yeah, Sarah Collins, little ghost of Sarah Collins said, "Oh, you know, they went on big ships to China." Well, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so then you got the fur trade, you got the opium trade, you got the slave trade, you got all these things that are that New England was deeply involved in, particularly the privileged families,
Yeah.
and particularly if they were going to sea. And all of a sudden, there's all kinds of extra stuff that Dan didn't put directly into the series. But I noticed that there was one really interesting episode where Barnabas was talking about what he learned in Barbados about a secret number that held the secret of the universe. It was kind of a harmonic Pythagorean thing, I imagine. And that was
what
fascinating.
episode was that?
Oh,
Remember?
we have it written down. I'll send it to you. We have a note on that.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, so don't hold me to this.
Yeah.
I think it's during when Nicholas Blair shows up. I could be wrong. So I do know that he does mention Barbados. You're right.
Yeah, Barnabas
I'm old too.
Talked about that, and he
So-
showed it. He showed them what he can do,
Yeah.
and it was like, wow. Even without, it's probably enhanced because he's a vampire.
No, wait a
But
minute.
he knew how to do some stuff
He
beforehand.
bit Carolyn. Okay.
Yeah,
He
bit
bit Carolyn, and he was using Carolyn. And then he had Carolyn come to the old house because he wanted to haunt Julia Hoffman. And so that's when he used that secret number to haunt Julia Hoffman. And he made Carolyn sit there with him,
And he showed her.
He showed her how it worked, and he just disappeared. Well, I'm not sure that it was specifically.
So there's an African witch doctor in Barbados that taught him this
It was
stuff.
some kind of magic that Barnabas specifically used to make himself look and act like
Dr. Woodard.
Dr.
Oh
Woodard.
yeah.
Now, it may have been that kind of magic or not. I wasn't sure because there were other things involved with haunting Julia, like the lights going on and off, and all this weird stuff happened to Julia in conjunction with it. And I'm not sure what kind of magic Barnabas is using. He might have used some of that. I don't know what he was doing really, but Barnabas had powers, and his powers were more prevalent in the 1897 story arc. If you watch him use it, you see, especially when he was using it on Charity Trask. Oh my!
And if you want to see a really good fantasy series set in West Africa, or listen to it or read it, I say Tony Adeyemi's book. She's getting me to come out with a third volume in September. Children of Blood and Bone is the first one, and it's a fascinating study. It's a spear, sword, and sorcery Nigerian story in a fantasy Nigeria, and you get an idea of the potential for West African paranormal.
Well, they could have gotten it. Barnabas could have taken all kinds. He just because he only talked about a little bit of it to Carolyn doesn't mean he didn't have more.
Well,
maybe he
just
Martinique. Didn't want to. Yeah,
Barbados.
Yeah, maybe he just didn't have time, or didn't want to get involved, or didn't really want to go in depth with Carolyn. Because if he did, he would kind of throw her off, because she had a tendency to just kind of float off. And he didn't want her to do that. So he
visited his maternal cousin in London, who was probably acting as an agent for the Collins family, because British law required them to have an agent. So why not a cousin? And
he could have kept papers there.
Yeah. No, he would. They would have.
They probably had.
It was the law.
All kinds of papers.
After the revolution, they had to. Yeah.
In the family, and just because when Quentin went over to London, I think he said something like 6 months.
He was in England for 6 months. He didn't say where he was.
He may not have properly interpreted how the original estates were handed off. And probably Gerald Soames, which was Kitty's husband, he probably had purchased a huge chunk of that estate that used to belong to the Collins.
Or he inherited it.
But the whole thing is, the Collins had gigantic estates. They had money.
I think that probably was the original Collins property that Lord Hampshire was in.
He may have.
He was an Earl Hampshire. So Kitty was a countess.
Do you do you think the Collins family got some of their money and connections from the royal family?
Which royal family?
The royal family, London, England, the king.
Um, I think that it's very likely that that they started coming of age in the late Elizabethan period, but I don't think that really began to happen until the Stuart period. And in the Stuart period, and in this and during the Protest during the English Civil War period, the Republican period, and then back with the Stuart Restoration, and then with William and Mary, when Mary um, kicks out her father, and she and her husband take over, and they she's still a Stuart, but she just kicked out her father, and
We found Collins though.
there's a lot
We
going
found
on
a
there.
Collins.
And there are stories in genealogical records,
Yeah,
historical
we found
records
some Collins
that you can draw
out
some
there.
inspiration from. But I think that they earn their money by working their way up the system. At the time, that points to privateering as a likely candidate for making some good killings. I don't think they were involved in what was going on in Ireland. I'd say probably the Caribbean, probably going to sea, which is unusual for the Puritans.
No, Isaac.
So I think
Isaac
Isaac went to sea,
probably was a privateer.
and I think his father went to sea,
and
and I think his grandfather went to sea.
No, wait, he would have had letters from the royalty. If he was a
Oh,
privateer, he would have had.
they would have had to have
Mark's,
letters of marque and reprisal. Yeah.
he would have had. Isaac would have had Mark's letters of marques and reprisal from the royals. Yeah, he would have. And the reason he would have is because that's how a big chunk of change was made.
Well, that's how they bolstered their navy.
Yeah, and they were transporting slaves and all kinds of stuff. And they were also taking advantage of the fact there was all these treasure ships, and they would go out there and plunder them, and then they take the.
and that gets into a lot of history.
Anyway,
read about the Stuarts. Read about Elizabeth.
We're talking
money. The last of the Tudors, her long reign. Read about the Stuarts and the under Oliver Cromwell, and that period, and the Stuart Restoration, and then getting into William and Mary, and then Queen Anne, and you get a real sense of the world that the Collins family came out of.
Don't let those portraits, those kind of soft looking portraits of the the later aged Collins men trick you into believing that had something to do with what their younger selves were like, because people change.
Yeah.
And when they get settled and they get a family going and they get a property going and you get possessions going and you get all this stuff kind of started, it changes the way you make things happen. And so Isaac probably settled a bit. Now, whether or not those portraits were, like him, no. I say no. I say that early Isaac would have had the portrait that I'm going to give him.
Well, Lynn's got a portrait where he's got a few pistols, and he's got the baggy pants and the fancy shirt and all of that. He looks like a sea captain who was quite capable of taking care of himself.
Yeah, and Naomi's
Naomi's
pirate ghosts are coming to call, because quite frankly, they got shoved out the door and that pissed them off, and they've been hanging around waiting for somebody to help them out. So, and they're getting tired of going to biker bars and haunting the bikers.
Oh yeah.
So,
we took them out of history as well.
I took them out of history as well, because quite frankly, Naomi was doing some stuff. And just because she just, it showed her later in her life sitting around drinking or, getting drunk and stuff like this. I think the younger version of Naomi was pretty hot stuff.
Well, she didn't get married right away. She got married later than we would normally expected.
She
Also,
was hot stuff.
the other thing about Naomi is look how
Real.
old she was when Sarah was born, but we don't have time to go into that one today. Hint, look in the Bible about Sarah, and you see that instead of being the mother, this time Sarah is the child's name. Born, she's a miracle child. So you've got something going on there. Who's around to do that? Oh, Laura Collins, Laura Murdoch Collins, who died the year or two before Sarah was born, about the year before Sarah was conceived. So there's a little intervention there. And the curious thing about Laura is the Jeremiah's wife, she died before she had a chance to really do anything. So she may have been, she's my candidate for enabling Naomi at the age of about 50 to have Sarah.
Yeah, Naomi was about 50 years old.
I think long before Naomi, I think Naomi's family was once rich and they became poor, and she was promised to Joshua, if you will, but at a young age, because usually when you're promised to somebody, you're usually like a child, but you don't get married until you're older. And I think what happened is she ran away on a ship and became a pirate.
Well, that's a reasonable story arc. The other
awesome.
one is looking at the name Bradford.
Yeah.
That family is so well documented. There's no way she's one of those New England Bradfords. But there's a Bradford in Somerset.
Yeah,
and that
Bradford's
would be
in
where I
Somerset.
would place her family as originating from.
Bradford's in Somerset.
So look
yeah,
at that
yeah.
one up, and it's not that far. It's in the right part of England, so that suggests some things as well.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah, we do a lot of this kind of work. Anyway, I don't want to drag this episode of your great podcast series, your great YouTube and podcast series beyond what it should be. So I'll let you set the parameters. It's your show.
Well, I have one final question before I let you guys go.
Sure.
What's your favorite time travel storyline for the both of you?
Oh, wow.
From DS.
I think my favorite one, because it comes as somewhat of a surprise, is the way Barnabas went back through the painting into his original time period, and the way Angelique was also able to travel through time. That whole coming together shows that there's a lot of fascinating things in Dan and the others in the series, because he wasn't around as much with the Leviathans at the time. He was working on some other projects. But the fact that there was so much movement through time, it's a favorite of mine because it opens up possibilities they never got to explore. And no journalist likes to see that.
Where Barnabas went with Kitty Soames.
Yeah, he went with Kitty, and then he got ripped off and taken into the future, back to his own time, his own future time. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Leviathans got hold of him too. Oh, you can travel in time.
For writers, it's like an invitation, and Dan was really good at planning invitations. He knew his history. I'm sure he talked about it a lot, and I believe that. And I mentioned this to you previously.
I mean, Nicholas had so many failures. He didn't dare show up right at the beginning of the Leviathan.
Right.
He had to hide.
Anyway, my final thing is that I believe that Dan was really focused on it, because we look at Winds of War and War and Remembrance, we see somebody who was.
I'm gonna use Barnabas to be the head of the Leviathans, because man, he owes me big time.
But Dan made sure that everything fit into history.
He owed him everything.
1484 for the Lady Washington going over to China, coming back, and that's a great time for Jeremiah to leave. His wife has just died, and all of a sudden, oh well, come on, cousin, I'm gonna show you the world, and off they go. I think that's when a lot of Barnabas's training that Laura Parker wrote about would have happened during that period. I think that's a lot for people to think about. Look it up. You'll see that Dan made certain that the series fit into all the convenient places
Talking about
in
time
history.
travel now.
Yeah, time travel.
Yeah.
Well, you got to get to go back to those times.
Yeah, but
And parallel
Captain
worlds.
Quentin Collins was the one that built that staircase. You know,
Oh,
he
yeah.
probably built 2 or 3 more of those, and maybe even a room after him and Daphne got back. Because why should he just give up his ideas?
You got Quentin and
He's not that
Jeremiah
kind of-
and Isaac
when you-
building things that
Yeah, see-
geomancy is involved. Yeah.
The thing is, you could not stop Quentin
Yeah.
in 1840. He just had this mind that just went on and on and on. Even after all that crap he went through, and Daphne and all this other stuff, there's no way he's going to just sit around at home and do nothing when he gets back.
Yeah.
So my idea is he built all kinds of secret parallel time rooms in Collinwood.
Where
Didn't
did
tell
all
anybody.
that money come from?
Yeah, where did all that money come from? I mean, seriously, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. And the China trade and all this other kind of trade stuff that he would have been involved in.
Eric J. Dolan's book, When America First Met China, and his book on the fur trade, and you get an idea of what
Captain Quentin Collins was not going to sit around like a doldrum at home.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't going to do it.
I think there's an interesting. I talked about a potential civil war between the Collins family, where there were probably some members who were members of the Leviathan family, and some members who were members of the cult of Judah Zachary. I do think there's something, especially with Caleb.
Who's the guy
Sayers
from the witch trials that were close to Salem, but not Salem? What was his name? That bad guy. It was in the 1840s series. His head, Judah Zachary.
Yeah.
Judah Zachary is another character.
Yeah, Joel just said that. A war between Judah Zachary and Ptolemy.
The Leviathans, I think.
Leviathans?
I think
the Leviathans, that was a Nicholas thing. So you have to think about whether or not Nicholas was going to do any.
Well, they would have been around. There could be some historical Leviathan activity going way back.
No, he put his finger on it. They put their finger right on Barnabas. You can time travel. We want you. And if you listen to what the Leviathan priest said, they said, we want you. You can time travel. Okay, that puts it in a type of perspective. Just because Nicholas didn't show up right away, you kind of caught wind of something going on here, some plot.
So they opened up a door and they snatched him.
Yeah, they snatched him.
Come on.
Yeah, took him.
Come home in glory.
Is there anything you both want to add before we get on out of here?
Well, if I could, I'd like to encourage people to listen to Lynn and I talk about a lot of these different kinds of themes on our Deep Shadows on Tuesdays on Twitter Spaces. And we're going to be developing a podcast series, which we will name in the future. And that'll be something we'll be doing. So we'll be part of the community. Definitely.
Guys, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming on the channel. I appreciate it very much.
Great being here.
Go check out at Dean Edwards on Twitter, at Lynn Edwards on Twitter.
At Echoes Kaifos.
Or sorry, yeah. What is it? Go ahead.
Echoes, sound, Kai, and light.
Okay.
Close.
And it's at Lynn Edwards on Twitter, I believe, too, for Lynn.
At Lynn_Veil Pixie.
Okay. Yep. I'll get it right.
Or just look up Deep Shadows, do a Twitter search, and you'll see our episodes, and we're listed in there along with Don Schmidt, who is next week he'll be back helping us host.
Yeah, he went to the theater.
He's our resident realtor, so he knows about historical renovations and preservation and properties and all kinds of fun things.
Yeah, Don's a knowledgeable dude. Thank you both for coming on. It was fun. It was a blast.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Jules, for having us.
You're welcome. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.